a wedding destined to be the dawn of a beautiful life, a celebration of impossible splendor with hundreds of guests and sacred vows exchanged. Everything was flawless. Yet a single gift from the bride's father would twist this perfect day into an unending nightmare. Elara and Kael arrived in the world just months apart, born into the same sun-drenched, affluent district of Viridia. Their families were pillars of the community, their lives interwoven by years of shared business ventures and a profound, common cultural heritage. They inhabited a world of legacy and privilege where generations of triumph had forged a bedrock of wealth and influence. But for Elara and Kael, none of that mattered as much as the simple, pure delight of having each other. From their very first years, they were a single soul in two bodies. Their mothers, both formidable entrepreneurs, would often schedule their playdates, knowing the deep comfort their children found in one another's presence. Their fathers, men of tradition and quiet dignity, would often jest that the two were fated to be together, long before the children could grasp the true weight of that word. In the golden afternoons of their youth, they would chase one another through the sprawling manicured gardens of their family estates, their laughter echoing like wind chimes through the air. When they weren't lost in the outdoors, they were found side by side, poring over books that opened doors to fantastical worlds, or battling in video games that Kael, almost without fail, would win. Even then, Elara's fierce spirit would ignite, and she would demand a rematch with every single loss, her determination a bright and burning thing. As the years flowed by, their connection deepened, evolving into something neither could fully articulate. In any crowd at any gathering, they would inevitably gravitate towards each other, their bond an effortless, silent understanding that needed no words, no constant reassurance. They shared a trust that was absolute, their lives entwined in a way that felt as natural and as necessary as breathing. When they entered primary school, their unique closeness became even more pronounced. Teachers would marvel at how perfectly they complemented one another, how seamlessly their strengths and weaknesses danced together. Kael was the anchor, logical, steady, methodical. Elara was the storm, creative, bold, and utterly fearless. Whenever she grew restless in the quiet of the classroom, her pen drifting to sketch dreams in the margins of her notebooks, Kael would gently nudge her, whispering reminders of the lesson. And when Kael would hesitate, his own brilliant opinions caught in his throat, it was Elara who would whisper words of encouragement, a secret current of strength that pushed him to be more confident, to let his voice be heard. By the time they were 10, their friendship had solidified into a permanent, unshakable fixture in their lives, something neither could fathom living without. They had their spats, of course. Kael's unyielding practicality would sometimes collide with Elara's fiery impulsiveness, but even their arguments were fleeting, like summer showers. They knew each other too intimately, understood the hidden corners of each other's souls too deeply to ever let a small disagreement drive a wedge between them. Then adolescence arrived, and with it, a subtle alchemy began to transform everything. It was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, quiet unfolding. They began to see things in each other that had always been there, but were now illuminated by a new light. Kael found himself noticing the way Elara's laughter could fill a room with warmth, the way she wrinkled her nose when she was annoyed, a gesture that was, he realized with a jolt, strangely captivating. Elara, in turn, found her gaze lingering. On Kael, he had grown taller, his once boyish face now defined by sharper, more handsome lines, his quiet confidence, a magnetic force that made him stand out in any crowd. Others saw it too. Their classmates began to tease them, their questions, "Are you two together?" hanging in the air. At first they would laugh it off, the very idea seeming absurd. But as the years slipped by, the question no longer felt so ridiculous. By their 16th year, their relationship had shifted into a new dimension. What was once a simple, easy friendship was now laced with something more potent, something neither fully comprehended but both felt with an electrifying intensity. It was no longer just about companionship. It was about the way Kael's heart would hammer against his ribs whenever Elara leaned in close, the way Elara found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, memorizing the shape of his profile against the light. One warm evening, after a marathon of studying for exams, they sat together on the rooftop of Elara's house, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. The sky was a masterpiece of molten orange and soft pink, and a gentle breeze carried the intoxicating scent of blooming jasmine. It was in that hushed, perfect moment that Elara gave voice to the thought that had been shimmering between them for months. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Kael turned to her, his expression quizzical. "What do you mean?" "If we were more," she clarified, gesturing to the space between them, "than just this." Kael's pulse leaped. He had wondered. Of course he had. But he had never dared to speak it aloud. "Yeah," he admitted, after a heart-stopping pause. "I do." Elara met his eyes, searching his expression for a sign, for an answer. Whatever she saw there must have been enough, because a soft, hesitant smile touched her lips, full of unspoken promises. And then, before thought could intervene, she leaned in and pressed a light, fleeting kiss to his lips. It was the beginning of something new, something unplanned, something they both welcomed with open and willing hearts. Their love story only grew stronger as their teenage years unfolded. They remained the best of friends, each other's staunchest supporters, but now their bond possessed a profound new depth. Together they navigated the thrilling, uncertain waters of young love, learning what it meant to be not just friends, but partners. There were, of course, challenges. Not everyone believed a love born in childhood could survive the tests of time. Some whispered it was a passing phase, that they would inevitably drift apart. But Elara and Kael were deaf to the doubts. They knew the truth of what they shared, and they had no intention of letting it go. By the time they graduated from high school, their future was already a shared canvas. They dreamed not just of their individual ambitions, but of the life they were destined to build together. They had defied the quiet skepticism, proving that what began as a childhood friendship had blossomed into something magnificent. When they were both accepted into universities in the same city, they saw it as a sign, a confirmation from the universe that their journey was meant to continue, side by side. As they stood on the precipice of adulthood, neither held a single doubt. Whatever the future held, they would face it as one. Theirs was not a fleeting romance. It was an enduring love, a bond they believed would withstand any test. They had no idea just how severely that bond was about to be tried. Elara and Kael stepped into the world of adulthood with a shared, unwavering sense of purpose. The blueprints for their dreams had been laid down years ago, shaped by ambitions they had carefully nurtured since they were children. They were no longer simply the inseparable friends who had discovered love. They were individuals on a mission, each determined to carve their own legacy into the world. Their bond remained a fortress as they transitioned from the familiar halls of high school to the sprawling campuses of university. Unlike so many young couples who faltered under the weight of newfound freedom, Elara and Kael thrived. They chose different universities within the vibrant heart of Viridia, but remained inextricably linked. Kael dove into one of the nation's most prestigious architecture programs, losing himself in the art of design, while Elara pursued her passion for fashion, creating African-inspired haute couture that masterfully wove traditional motifs with breathtakingly modern silhouettes. Despite their demanding academic pursuits, they always carved out sacred time for each other. Weekends were theirs alone, reserved for long, winding drives beyond the city limits, discovering hidden restaurants, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, speaking of the future they both saw so clearly. They were a team supporting each other through caffeine-fueled nights of study, the immense pressure to excel, and the daunting stress of their competitive fields. As their studies progressed, their individual stars began to rise. Kael's professors recognized in him a rare genius, a visionary who saw buildings not merely as structures, but as living legacies, a perfect marriage of bold innovation and deep respect for history. Before he even reached his final year, he had already been offered a coveted internship at one of the country's most elite architectural firms. Ilara's ascent was just as meteoric. She began designing bespoke pieces in her second year, her work quickly capturing the rapt attention of fashion influencers and industry insiders on social media. By her third year, she had interned with a legendary fashion house, and her vibrant, audacious designs were being celebrated in emerging designer showcases. She was a force of nature, ambitious, fiercely determined, and unafraid to shatter the established norms of her industry. Through it all, amidst the whirlwind of their burgeoning careers, Ilara and Kael never lost sight of the one thing that mattered most: their profound love for one another. They had grown up together, adapted to every change together, and embraced the beautiful evolution of their relationship. Yet one question lingered in the air between them. When would they take the final step? Ilara loved Kael with every fiber of her being, but the idea of marriage was not something she was willing to rush. She had witnessed too many promising young women compromise their dreams too soon, trapped by the weight of societal expectations. She was determined to first build her own empire, to prove to the world and to herself that she could stand on her own 2 feet before she became someone's wife. Kael understood. A part of him yearned for the certainty of forever, but he waited patiently, knowing that when the time was right, it would be a decision they made together. She had always dreamed of visiting the Serene Isles, a place whose mythic landscapes and vibrant culture had long captivated her imagination. When Ilara suggested the trip, Kael knew this was his moment. He had been carrying an engagement ring for weeks, a secret weight in his pocket, waiting for the perfect alignment of stars. As they planned their island escape, he knew he had found it. The first few days of their journey were pure magic. They resided in a luxurious eco-lodge perched on the edge of a sprawling savanna, where wildlife roamed in majestic freedom. Their mornings were spent on safari drives, their afternoons by infinity pools that bled into the endless plains, and their evenings under a canopy of stars so brilliant it felt like a dream. Ilara was in her element, capturing every breathtaking moment with her camera, sketching designs inspired by the raw beauty and vivid colors that surrounded her. Kael watched her, his heart swelling with a love so immense it almost hurt, knowing with absolute certainty that there was no one else in the world he wanted to share his life with. On the 4th night, he set his plan in motion. He had arranged an intimate dinner for 2 on a secluded terrace, offering a panoramic view of the vast wilderness. The table was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, and the air was filled with the distant wild sounds of the savannah. As they ate, Ilara spoke with infectious passion about her future collections, about the limitless possibilities she saw for her brand. Kael listened, a smile playing on his lips, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times, yet in that moment he felt utterly unprepared for the magnitude of it. As the last embers of sunset faded into twilight, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Ilara," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "I have loved you since before I even knew what love was. We grew up together, we built our dreams side by side, and I know, without a single doubt, that there is no life for me without you in it." She blinked, a slow dawn of realization in her eyes as he slid from his chair and knelt before her. The ring he presented was exquisite, a custom-designed fusion of modern elegance and cultural symbolism. A brilliant cut diamond shone at its center, flanked by intricate engravings of patterns that spoke of unity and eternity. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "I don't want to rush you," Kael continued, his voice softening, "but I know, deep in my soul, that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. Whether it's now, a year from now, or 10 years from now, I will wait for you, but if you're ready, I want to be your husband." For the first time in her life, Ilara was speechless. She had pictured this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the tidal wave of emotion that washed over her. She saw their entire future reflected in his eyes, felt the undeniable certainty of it in the way he held her hand. Tears welled, and she let out a choked, joyful laugh. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. The world seemed to dissolve into a beautiful blur as he slid the ring onto her finger, as she fell into his embrace, as they kissed under the vast, star-dusted sky. The sounds of the savannah enveloped them, the gentle rustle of the wind, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, as if the universe itself was blessing their union. That night they lay awake in their villa, fingers laced together, whispering plans for the future. They spoke of the wedding they would have, the places they would travel, the family they hoped to one day build. They dreamed of a life that stretched out before them, filled with boundless love, thrilling adventures, and an unwavering devotion. Neither of them could have possibly known what awaited them. For now, all that mattered was this. They had made a promise to each other, a promise they fully intended to keep for a lifetime. The morning after Kael's proposal, Ilara awoke feeling as if she were suspended in a beautiful dream. The engagement ring on her finger captured the first golden rays of the island sun, its brilliance a perfect mirror for the joy blooming in her heart. She turned in bed to find Kael still asleep beside her, his breath slow and steady. For a long, quiet moment, she simply watched him, overwhelmed by the profound reality of what had transpired. They were engaged, no longer just childhood sweethearts, no longer just two ambitious souls in love, but a couple who had promised each other forever. When Kael finally stirred, the first thing he saw was her radiant smile. They spent the morning in a blissful quiet, savoring these last few moments of peace before the wonderful chaos of wedding preparations inevitably began. Their return to Viridia was met with a tidal wave of excitement from their family and friends. Their engagement became a city-wide celebration. Their parents, who had secretly hoped for this day for years, immediately hosted an intimate gathering in their honor, the house filled with joyous laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and heartfelt stories chronicling their journey together. Kael's mother pulled Ilara aside, her eyes glistening with pride as she whispered that she had always known this day would come. The initial thrill soon gave way to the intricate reality of planning a wedding. Ilara and Kael, both intensely driven individuals, approached the task with the same meticulous determination they applied to their careers. They envisioned a wedding that was more than just a lavish spectacle. It had to be a true reflection of them, their love, their cultures, and the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. The first crucial decision was the venue. They both agreed it had to be breathtakingly unique and deeply meaningful. After weeks of searching, they discovered the perfect location, an exclusive mountaintop estate on the Azure coast with a commanding view of the Atlantic Ocean. The estate was a masterpiece of history and majesty, perched on the edge of a towering cliff enveloped by lush greenery and offering panoramic vistas of the endless blue sea. It was a place that felt timeless, just like their love. The instant they set foot on the property, Ilara could see it all. The ceremony would be held in an open-air courtyard with guests seated beneath a sweeping canopy of white roses. The reception would unfold in a grand glass pavilion, its walls reflecting the shifting hues of the ocean at sunset, creating an atmosphere of unparalleled elegance and intimacy. They stood together on the terrace, the ocean breeze swirling around them, and Kael squeezed her hand as they silently agreed. This was where their forever would begin. With the venue secured, the real planning commenced. No expense was spared. Their wedding was to be an event unlike any other, a seamless fusion of their rich cultural heritage and sophisticated modern elegance. Ilara, a natural perfectionist, collaborated closely with the wedding planners, ensuring every single detail was flawlessly curated. Her gown, a creation by one of Africa's most celebrated designers, would feature intricate beadwork and patterns, inspired by their shared ancestry, a stunning blend of sacred tradition and haute couture. Kael, while less concerned with the minutiae, had a clear vision for the wedding's atmosphere, a feeling of warmth, boundless joy, and heartfelt celebration surrounded by the people who had shaped their lives. The guest list quickly swelled into the hundreds, a testament to their wide circle of friends, family, and industry figures from both the fashion and architectural worlds. It was clear this would be more than a wedding. It would be the social event of the year, with magazine features and interviews hailing it as the perfect union of love and legacy. At times, the pressure became overwhelming. Ilara found herself drowning in a sea of decisions, floral arrangements, menu tastings, seating charts. Seeing the stress in her eyes, Kael would often remind her to breathe, to step back and remember that at the very heart of all this splendor was simply the two of them and their love. In the midst of the chaos, they found refuge in small, quiet moments. Late at night, when the world was still, they would sit together on their balcony, speaking of the future that lay beyond the wedding. They dreamed of the home they would build, the adventures they would share. Kael often joked that he was simply letting her have her way with the wedding plans because, in the end, only one thing truly mattered to him, that she would be the one standing beside him on their day. Weeks melted into months, and as the wedding date approached, the anticipation became a palpable force. The estate was transformed into a scene from a fairy tale, a breathtaking vision of beauty and elegance. Every detail was executed to perfection, from the towering floral installations to the handcrafted invitations sent to each guest. There were rehearsals, final fittings, and last-minute adjustments. The excitement was electric, not just for them, but for everyone involved in bringing their dream to life. Then came the night before the wedding. Tradition dictated they spend it apart, but sleep was impossible for either of them. They found themselves on the phone at midnight, their voices hushed, laughing at the surreal feeling of it all. Ilara confessed that despite all the grandeur, all the meticulous planning, the moment she longed for most was the one where she would walk towards him, knowing that, in that instant, nothing else in the world mattered. Kael told her that he had never been more certain of anything in his entire life. The morning of the wedding dawned with the first golden light breaking over the mountains. The air was crisp, carrying the clean scent of the sea. Guests began to arrive, their laughter and excited chatter filling the courtyard. In separate suites, Ilara and Kael prepared for the most important day of their lives. Ilara's gown was a true masterpiece, shimmering under the light, adorned with delicate embroidery that told the story of their heritage. As her mother adjusted, her veil, tears welled in her eyes, a silent acknowledgment of the beautiful journey her daughter had taken. Kael, dressed in an impeccably tailored ivory suit, stood before a mirror, steadying his breath. His best man clapped him on the back, grinning. "You ready for this?" Kael met his own gaze in the reflection and smiled, more than ever. As the ceremony was about to begin, the guests took their seats, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The music swelled, and the grand doors opened. Alara stepped forward, her breath catching, as her eyes locked with Kael's at the far end of the aisle. In that moment, the world around them vanished. The magnificent setting, the hundreds of guests, the sheer weight of the event, it all faded into a soft blur. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for their entire lives. Neither of them knew that this perfect day would soon shatter into an unimaginable nightmare. The air at the mountaintop estate was electric with anticipation as Alara stood just beyond the grand entrance to the ceremony hall. Her hands clutched the bouquet of white orchids, their delicate petals a perfect match for the cascading floral arrangements that lined the aisle. She could hear the soft murmur of guests finding their seats, the ripple of laughter, the gentle strains of a string quartet. Beyond those doors, Kael was waiting. The thought sent a tremor through her, not of nervousness, but of something far deeper, a profound certainty that she was about to step into the life she had always dreamed of, with the man who had been her world for as long as she could remember. The past few hours had been a whirlwind, her mother's gentle hands adjusting the intricate embroidery on her dress, bridesmaids fluttering around her with last-minute touches, a symphony of laughter and excitement that had now settled into a deep, resonant calm. The true magnitude of the moment was sinking in. This was not just a celebration, it was a promise. Across the estate, Kael stood in the open courtyard, surrounded by his groomsmen. He was no stranger to pressure, to standing before an audience, and presenting his grand architectural visions. But nothing could have prepared him for this. He had spent the morning in quiet contemplation, his father stopping by to offer a few words of wisdom, his best man trying to ease the tension with jokes. But no matter how he tried to remain calm, his heart had been racing since the moment he awoke. He had never once doubted this day, had never wavered in his love for Alara. But the weight of this moment was beautifully, overwhelmingly real. The guests were seated beneath a vast canopy of white roses, their chairs arranged in perfect rows, leading to an altar that overlooked the endless expanse of the ocean. The scene was ethereal, a dream made manifest. The estate's courtyard, bathed in the soft golden light of the setting sun, was the perfect stage for the ceremony that would bind them together forever. A gentle ocean breeze carried the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below, a pulse that seemed to beat in time with his own heart. Then the moment arrived. The music swelled, the great doors swung open, and a collective hush fell over the crowd as Alara appeared, her silhouette framed by the golden light streaming in behind her. Time itself seemed to slow as she moved forward, each step deliberate, her veil trailing behind her like a whisper. Kael's breath caught in his throat. She was more than breathtaking. She was his. Alara barely registered the admiring whispers. From the guests, the soft gasps as they saw her for the first time. Her gaze was locked on Kael, the man who was her best friend, her partner, her greatest love. Every doubt, every fear, every trace of uncertainty about the future dissolved as she walked toward him. Her father took her arm, his grip strong and filled with a universe of unspoken emotion. He had been quiet all morning, watching her with an expression she now understood was the bittersweet realization that his little girl was beginning a new chapter. When they reached the altar, he looked at Kael, his expression unreadable for a moment, before giving a single firm nod of approval. The ceremony began, the officiant's voice a calm and steady presence. Kael and Alara barely heard the words. Their world had shrunk to the space between them, to the feel of their hands clasped together, to the silent promises exchanged in a single glance. When it was time for their vows, Alara took a steadying breath. She spoke first, her voice clear and strong, telling him that he was the foundation of her life, that he had stood by her through every triumph and every failure, that he had loved her without condition or hesitation. She promised that no matter what life brought their way, she would always choose him. Kael's vows were just as raw and unguarded. He told her that she was the dream he never knew he had, that he had loved her since they were children, captivated not just by her beauty, but by the fierce intelligence of her mind and the boundless compassion of her heart. He told her that she was his home and always would be. The officiant called for the rings, and they slid the simple, perfect bands of gold onto each other's fingers, the metal glinting in the fading sunlight. And then the words that would bind them forever rang through the air. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Thunderous applause erupted from their guests as Kael pulled Elara into his arms, kissing her with all the love and certainty in his soul. For a moment the world blurred, the only anchor the feeling of his lips on hers, of their hearts racing in perfect unison. When they finally broke apart, Elara laughed, breathless and radiant, and Kael grinned down at her, brushing a stray curl from her face. The reception that followed was nothing short of spectacular. The glass pavilion had been transformed into a wonderland of golden candlelight, with floral arrangements towering over tables where guests dined on exquisitely prepared dishes. The music was infectious, the dance floor alive with celebration. They moved through the evening as if in a fairy tale, dancing, laughing, and stealing quiet moments together amidst the joyous chaos. Kael twirled Elara under the soft glow of the chandeliers, whispering how perfect she looked, how he still couldn't believe she was his. She leaned into him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, committing every second of this perfect night to memory. As the evening wore on, speeches were given and glasses were raised. Their parents spoke of destiny, of a love they had always known was meant to be. Their friends shared stories of their shared journey, of childhood adventures, and the moment they all realized these two were soulmates. Then came the surprise. Elara's father stood at the center of the room, a proud smile on his face, and gestured toward the open terrace. A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Outside, a sleek, high-end helicopter sat waiting on the estate's private helipad. It was his gift, he explained, a way for them to begin their new life with an unforgettable experience. A breathtaking aerial tour of the coastline, just the two of them. A moment of perfect peace before the world rushed back in. Elara gasped, turning to Kael with wide, unbelieving eyes. He let out a stunned laugh. It was extravagant, unexpected, and undeniably perfect for a couple who had always reached for the sky. Excited applause followed them as they made their way to the waiting aircraft, pausing for one last photograph in the warm glow of the reception lights. As they stepped onto the helicopter, Elara felt a surge of pure exhilaration, of a love so immense it felt boundless. She took Kael's hand as they settled into their seats, the engines roaring to life. Neither of them knew that in just a few short minutes, their perfect night would turn into an unimaginable nightmare. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt from the ocean as the celebration continued in full swing. The grand reception hall, with its floor-to-ceiling glass walls, was a beacon of golden light against the darkened sky, the soft flicker of candlelight dancing across elegantly set tables. The laughter of guests mingled with the vibrant rhythms of the band, their joy a perfect mirror of the love that filled the night. Elara and Kael were at the heart of it all, their hands intertwined as they moved through the crowd. Every few feet another well-wisher would stop them, a family member, a childhood friend, an industry leader, all people whose lives had been touched by their journey. There were warm embraces, heartfelt congratulations, and endless toasts to their shared happiness. Champagne flowed like a river, the clinking of glasses a constant, joyful melody. Elara felt as though she were floating. Her smile never wavered, a pure reflection of the happiness radiating from within. Kael, though never one for grand displays, was thriving, embracing every single second, knowing this was the dawn of something greater than either of them had ever imagined. As the music swelled, the band shifted to a slower tempo, a melody that beckoned lovers to the dance floor. A hush fell over the guests as Kael turned to Alara, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation, allowing him to lead her into the soft glow where they were the only two people in the world. The room faded away as he pulled her close, their bodies swaying in perfect harmony. "I love you," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Kael smiled, his fingers tightening around hers. "I know, and I will love you for the rest of my life." It was a promise he would have given his very soul to keep. As the song ended, applause washed over them, but before they could leave the floor, the sound of a microphone tapping drew everyone's attention. Ilara's father stood at the center of the room, his expression one of immense pride. "A love like this is rare," he began, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Ilara and Kael. "It is powerful, and as a father, there is nothing more I could have asked for than to see my daughter find a man worthy of her heart." He paused, a small smile touching his lips. "And so, I wanted to give you both a gift to mark the beginning of your journey in a way you will never forget." The doors to the terrace swung open, and a collective gasp swept through the room. Outside, on the private helipad, sat a sleek, luxurious helicopter, its black and gold exterior gleaming under the reception lights. Ilara turned to Kael, her eyes wide with astonishment. He just shook his head in quiet disbelief. "Dad, what is this?" she whispered. Her father chuckled. "A chance for you and your husband to see the world from a new perspective, together." This was no ordinary wedding gift. It was an adventure, a promise of an unforgettable flight above the coastline. A pilot in a pristine uniform stepped forward, nodding respectfully. "We're ready when you are, Mr. and Mrs. Valerius." Kael glanced at Ilara, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, her lips curving into an excited smile. "I can't believe this," she breathed, as they were guided toward the waiting aircraft, cameras flashing, guests cheering them on. As they approached, Ilara's father clapped Kael on the shoulder. "Take care of her," he said, the words carrying a weight beyond the usual sentiment. Kael met his gaze and nodded firmly. "Always?" With one final wave, they climbed inside. The interior was plush and luxurious. Ilara reached for Kael's hand as the pilot began the pre-flight checks, and he squeezed it reassuringly. The engines roared to life, the rotor blades spinning into a blur, kicking up a gust of wind that sent Ilara's veil fluttering. She looked back at the reception one last time, taking in the sight of their loved ones watching from below, their faces glowing. Then, with a smooth, powerful lift, they ascended into the night sky. The estate shrank beneath them, the coastline stretching out like a ribbon of diamonds. The lights of Port Sterling twinkled in the distance, and the ocean reflected the silver glow of the moon. It was utterly breathtaking. Ilara leaned her head against Kael's shoulder, sighing in contentment. "This is incredible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "So are you." For a few perfect minutes, they simply absorbed the view, lulled by the rhythmic hum of the helicopter. Everything was perfect. Until suddenly it wasn't. A violent gust of wind slammed into the helicopter, jolting them sideways. Ilara gasped, her fingers digging into Kael's arm as the aircraft tilted at an unnatural angle. "Hold on!" The pilot's voice crackled through the headset, tense but controlled. "We've hit an unexpected crosswind." Kael tightened his grip on her hand. "It's okay," he said, though a tremor of fear had entered his voice. "Another jolt, this one stronger." The aircraft shuddered violently, and warning lights flashed across the control panel. Ilara's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Something was terribly wrong. "We're losing stability," the pilot's voice returned, now sharp with urgency. "Hang on!" Then chaos erupted. The helicopter lurched, tipping into a sickening spiral. The ocean below was no longer a beautiful backdrop, but a dizzying vortex. Alarms blared through the cabin as the pilot fought desperately for control. Panic clawed at Ilara's throat. Kael pulled her against him, shielding her with his body, his arms a steel cage around her trembling form. The ground was rushing up to meet them. There was no time to think, no time to scream, only the deafening roar of the wind, the flashing red lights, and the horrifying knowledge that this was not how their forever was supposed to begin. And then there was only impact. The moment of impact shattered the world into a maelstrom of fire, steel, and chaos. A deafening, guttural roar of metal tearing against rock ripped through the night, drowning out the gentle murmur of the sea and the faint, lingering echoes of laughter from the wedding estate high above. In the final terrifying seconds, Kael had wrapped himself around Alara, his body a final desperate shield as the world collapsed. The force of the collision tore the aircraft apart. The windshield imploded, sending shards of glass slicing through the cabin. The rotor blades snapped, shearing through trees before disintegrating against solid rock. The tail of the helicopter crumpled like paper as the fuel tank erupted in a blinding flash, a thick plume of black smoke clawing its way into the sky. An eerie, suffocating silence followed, lasting only a moment before the flames roared to life, hungrily consuming the wreckage. The mangled remains of the helicopter rested precariously on a steep incline, half on solid ground and half dangling over a sheer drop into the churning ocean below. It groaned under its own weight, threatening to give way at any second. Inside, the twisted metal, Alara stirred, a low moan of pain escaping her lips. Her mind was a thick fog of confusion, every inch of her body screaming in agony. A warm trickle of blood stung her eye as the horrifying reality crashed down upon her. The wedding, the helicopter, Kael. Panic, sharp and cold, cut through the pain. "Kael," she rasped, her voice weak and hoarse. The smoke was thick and acrid, making it impossible to breathe. Her trembling fingers brushed against something solid, a familiar warmth. Kael. He was slumped against the remains of his seat, his face obscured by blood and soot, his once pristine suit torn and stained crimson. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He was alive. Relief was a fleeting thing, immediately replaced by terror. Flames were crackling just behind them, and the wreckage groaned again, shifting dangerously. If they didn't move, they would either burn alive or plummet to their deaths. With a surge of sheer willpower, Alara ignored the fire in her muscles and began to crawl toward him. "Kael," she pleaded, shaking his shoulders. "Wake up!" His eyelids fluttered. "Alara?" His voice was a barely audible whisper. "You have to. Wake up," she gritted out, tears blurring her vision. "We have to get out of here." A sudden, violent shift beneath them sent her heart plummeting. The wreckage was slipping, summoning every last ounce of her strength. She hooked her arms under his and began to drag him toward a gaping hole in the fuselage. The agony was immense, but she pushed through it. The heat of the fire licked at her back, the smoke burning her lungs, but she kept moving. With one final desperate heave, she pulled them both free of the wreckage, tumbling onto the rocky ground, just as another explosion ripped through what was left of the helicopter. The force sent them rolling down. The incline, her grip on Kael slipping as gravity tore them apart. Pain lanced through her as she came to an abrupt stop against a jagged rock. "Kael!" she cried, scrambling upright. She spotted him just a few feet away, lying terrifyingly still. She crawled to him, her hands trembling as she pressed them to his chest, searching for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. His breathing was shallow, but it was there. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Stay with me, Kael," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please, just stay with me." Above them, the wreckage groaned one last time before giving in to gravity. With a sickening screech, it slipped over the edge of the cliff, plummeting into the dark abyss below. A final explosion lit up the sky as it met the ocean. The sudden silence was deafening. Somewhere in the distance, faint and almost lost in the wind, she thought she heard sirens. Help was coming. But as she looked down at Kael's pale face, she didn't know if it would come soon enough. The flames roared, the intense heat pressing against Alara's back as she clung to Kael, her fingers tangled in the blood-soaked fabric of his shirt. The wreckage below them shifted, metal scraping against stone, a constant, terrifying reminder that they were perched on the very edge of oblivion. Smoke coiled into the night sky, a dark monument to the dream that had just died. Kael was fading. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. Blood trickled from a gash on his temple, a stark crimson against his pale skin. His fingers twitched within her grasp, a weak, desperate attempt to hold on. Ilara. His voice was a fragile whisper, nearly lost to the wind. Tears streamed down her face. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice cracking as she cupped his face with her trembling hands. "Please, just stay with me." But his eyes were losing focus, his gaze flickering between her and the encroaching darkness. The wreckage beneath them lurched, a sickening shift that sent a fresh wave of terror through Ilara. The section of the helicopter they were on was breaking away, its weight tilting precariously over the cliff's edge. She had to move him. Gritting her teeth against the searing pain in her ribs, she tried to lift him, her muscles screaming in protest. Every inch she gained was a brutal battle against gravity, against time, against the inevitable. Kael groaned in pain, his head lolling against her shoulder. She could feel him slipping away, his body growing heavier, his grip on consciousness unraveling. The wreckage groaned again, a final metallic scream of surrender. "Ilara!" Kael's voice was fainter now, almost swallowed by the fire. "It's okay." Her breath hitched. "No, it's not. We're getting out of here, do you hear me? You're going to be fine." He exhaled, a weak, shaky breath. "I love you." The words shattered her. "Don't you dare," she choked out, shaking her head violently. "Don't you say goodbye. We're going to make it. Just hold on." The wreckage shifted one last, final time. There was a deafening groan of twisted metal, the sickening crack of rock breaking apart beneath them. The section of the aircraft they Oiquais were clinging to finally lost its battle with gravity. For a single terrifying moment, there was only weightlessness, the sensation of falling. A gasp was trapped in Ilara's throat, her fingers still clutching Kael's arm as they tumbled together into the abyss. The night sky spun wildly above them, the burning wreckage shrinking in her vision as they plummeted toward the unforgiving. Rocks below. The impact was brutal, absolute. Darkness swallowed them whole. The ocean roared, its waves crashing against the jagged cliffs in a relentless, mourning rhythm. Smoke still coiled into the night sky from the wreckage high above, a silent testament to the tragedy. The distant echoes of sirens were carried on the wind, far too late to change what fate had already sealed. Ilara's body lay still among the scattered debris, her white wedding gown torn and stained, clinging to her lifeless form like a whisper against the cold stone. Her fingers were still curled, as if reaching for someone. Not far from her, Kael lay motionless, his arms outstretched as if even in their final moments he had been trying to shield her. The elegance of his wedding suit was gone, replaced by streaks of dirt and blood. His breathing had ceased long before the first responders ever reached the cliff top. The night was silent now. High above, searchlights swept across the devastation. The rescue team moved quickly, but their steps slowed as they peered over the edge of the cliff. The sight of the mangled bodies below confirmed their worst fears. There would be no survivors. The radios crackled with the grim news that the world would soon hear. They're gone. At the wedding estate, where only hours ago there had been music and laughter, the news spread like a virus. Gasps turned to sobs, disbelief giving way to the raw, gut-wrenching agony of loss. Mothers collapsed. Friends clung to one another, their hands trembling. The celebration had become awake in an instant. Ilara's father stood frozen, the weight of his gift, of his daughter's death, crashing down upon him. His wife's wail of despair echoed through the night, a sound that would haunt every guest for the rest of their lives. Kael's parents, once so full of pride, held on to each other as if their own hearts had been torn from their chests. Among the scattered rose petals and half-empty champagne glasses, the remnants of a beautiful dream lingered. A love story that should have spanned decades had been extinguished in a single, cruel night. Down below, in the quiet, tragic aftermath, the wind carried a single piece of fabric through the air. Ilara's veil, torn free in the fall, fluttered one last time before settling among the wildflowers growing in the cracks of the mountain, a delicate silken ghost among the ruins. It would remain there, untouched, a silent memorial to a love that burned so brightly but was never meant to last.